Welcome, everyone, to the Courageous Truth Podcast. As always, I am honored that you have chosen to spend a little bit of time with me today. On today's episode, I have a conversation with the owner of Around the Clock Daycare right in Pierce County, Washington, and she tells a story of what she feels to be unfair treatment, and all this up against the backdrop of mismanagement of funds and overfunding of daycares all across the United States. And what she explains is nothing short of fascinating about some of the inner workings and some of the mismanagement and mistreatment of law-abiding daycares, which she was. I visited the daycare center and saw it for myself. I'm going to allow her to tell the story, but before we do, I just kind of want to make sure that we define our terms. So she's going to use the term DCYF, that is the Department of Children, Youth, and Families. She is going to use the term subsidies, and that is just government payment of funds to certain entities or individuals. She is also going to use the term shell company, which is a legal entity. However, it is often and most times used to funnel and launder money through from one organization to another organization that might not be legal if they exchanged hands directly. So there's just some funny business going on there. This is part one of a two-part interview. If you are in the industry or know anything about the industry or are just curious about what's really taking place in the daycare field here in America and what's going on behind the scenes, this is a great place to start. I'm going to allow her to tell the story. This is so important for our free speech platform. So please enjoy this episode and see part two in just a few days. Around the Clock Daycare, and she has a very interesting story to tell. And I'm going to ask her to tell this about her daycare, her experiences, what challenges she's faced, what her story is, and really what the bigger picture of what's going on in the industry. And I think that she has a great perspective because of her involvement with different organizations that help support the industry and help support her and what she's had to work with. So I'm going to ask her to go ahead and tell her story, beginning with the beginning of this childcare and how she started. Erica, if you could go ahead and just speak into how you started this childcare and what kind of the first level of challenges that came about.
Absolutely. Thank you, Eric, for coming here and hearing my story.
Yeah.
I really appreciate your community involvement, and I thought it was important when I saw you on the internet speaking about this, that you'd be a good advocacy for letting the community know the full picture instead of just little pockets of information. So I started my childcare adventure pretty young in life. When I was 20 years old, well, 19 technically, I bought my first house, and I used the market to create capital, and I rode those markets until I had enough money to invest in my first childcare center, and that took quite a bit of years, about 10. But with that capital, I started my first center, and it was during a time where there was an open comprehensive plan through the Growth Management Act, and I ended up being zoned out of my daycare center. Luckily, but also...
And what city was that in?
That is in Midland, Washington.
Okay. And what county is that in?
Pierce.
Okay.
All my daycare centers have been in Pierce County.
Okay.
So I've been, during that time, and it was an unfortunate time for the community going through COVID, but it gave us a lot of time to do things we wouldn't normally do. And I went through a rabbit hole of the Growth Management Act that was initiated in 1992, where it governs how our land appropriation is in Washington State, Texas, and Florida. And I just quickly, so I don't waste our viewers' time, get to the short of it, found that childcare deserts and the crisis of childcare existed because zoning rules. They were not allowed to exist. The first step of getting a childcare center is making sure that the zoning is accurate to exist in that space. And it took me almost 5 years, and I'm happy to say that Washington State has removed almost all those barriers. We're sitting currently in my Lakewood location, where I took with my advocacy, Lakewood was at 4% zoning, and they're now at 44% for
Oh, wow.
childcare centers,
Okay.
which is huge. I'd like to see it have no barriers at
Mm-hmm.
all, but that would take away, for legislators, they say it takes away the jurisdictional rights of city and county municipalities.
Okay.
So, I feel like it was a victory. But within that, it shouldn't have taken 5 years, and it shouldn't have taken a regular person to realize that the reason why you're having a problem is because you're not allowing it to exist.
Mm-hmm.
It really only took me about 30 days to figure it out and fully understand it, and it took me 5 years to get someone to approve it. And then I got no recognition. So that, not that that matters, because I know it was my work, but it was also insult to injury because it was a fight. When I got zoned out of that property, I was like, this isn't going to work. And I had put already a lot of investment into it. And so from there, I expanded to a childcare center on 99th and Pacific Avenue.
Okay.
And that was called a manual childcare center previously, and they're in operations for well over 50 years.
Mm-hmm.
I did all my tenant improvements, and unfortunately, about a week before we were going to open, it flooded.
Oh, wow.
Completely flooded. And I went through 2.5 years of insurance, litigation, et cetera. That project is still sitting still, where I'm actually at this point going to walk away from it. It's just a little piece of the story. But really where it gets involved in kind of discovering all the different procedural disparities that DCYF and our government have came after I was able to get licensed centers.
DCYF would be Department of Child, Youth, and Families, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. And at that moment in time, I've already HELOC'd my home. I've already had, massive flooding. I'm like, I'm all in at this point. We have to figure this out. We have to get a center open. And this is when I came into the opportunity of Lakewood and Fife almost at the same time, basically, which is a hard task to do. But I was like, I'm up for the challenge. So I went through tenant improvements, and I'll tell you that in Lakewood, my building sat ready to open for 9 months before I got the approval from the city, which takes a lot of capital when you're planning on doing a job out of your pockets to, pay for the expenses.
Why did it take so long?
So they told me it was short staffing, but I pushed and I
Short staffing on their end?
On their end,
okay.
Yeah. And I pushed and called and emailed. And what's interesting is, and I hate to say this, because typically I wouldn't project some kind of thought process like this, but sometimes it is just what it is. 3 days after my dad contacted them, I had an approval. I had nothing that they needed. My dad got involved. He's like, why didn't you tell me about this? So you're going through this. And I said, well,
is your dad a city official or something?
No, he's not. He's just a contractor.
Oh.
So no ties. I had more ties because actually I left something really important out. When I discovered the zoning stuff, I became a land commissioner in Washington for Parkland, Spanaway, Midland. It was appointed to me. So I can review permits now. I'm understanding things. I'm getting this education well more than the average person. So you would think that I would be able to navigate Lakewood permitting department. The city manager got involved. My dad got involved. A few days later, I had my permits. There was really no reason for them to have, had a shortfall on my actual timeline of opening. It cost me a lot of money, and
because you're paying rent.
Yep, I'm paying rent.
Okay.
I have a fully operational building licensing. That said you're ready to go. Outside of the fact that I didn't have the occupancy for the building, but DCYF has entered into something new called pre-licensing, where their pre-licensors are supposed to come out and guide you. And that part of the process, I feel like went well at the time for both my locations. And I'll tell you at the end of this why it didn't go well. When DCYF came out, they basically said, okay, your cubbies, you have to have a cubby spot for each student enrolled. You have to have a nap cot for each student enrolled. You have to have a bed for each student that's enrolled. For the building, you have to have shaded on your playground. They went through all the different WAC requirements, and they approved my building as it was. We're sitting in my building now with several modifications that they brought to me only last month, which is a year and a half after they had approved how it was.
Mm-hmm.
When I got open in Lakewood, and Fife, which they opened within a month of each other, I had a shared director model. Before DCYF, it was called the Department, or it was the DEL, basically. Before the Department of Family and Youth was the DEL. So the DEL was governing childcare center licenses and their operations. In 2019, DCYF took over. And legislators had, said you can do this with making sure there's no unequitable barriers. You're not going to cause any chaos coming in. You're going to make it easier. It's going to be systematic, right? So 2019 came, and it was right during the COVID time. So they had plenty of time where they could have planned what they were going to do. Remember, I opened in my first center when I was operating. I had to do it as a preschool, 4-hour preschool exempt childcare, because I was in 2020 and I was zoned out, so I couldn't have a full childcare center for that.
If I could ask, what do you mean by chaos?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, they don't word it as chaos, but when I read the legislation, they're basically saying you're not going to change any rules significantly that is going to impact providers, so to speak. So it has to kind of mirror what the DL was already doing.
Mm-hmm. So let me ask this question. When someone comes to your daycare and like they're receiving like their own subsidies, so do you have to work with their subsidy provider in order for like tuition costs or whatever? Or how does
that work?
Yeah, how does that work?
Sure. So once you're licensed, once the Department of Licensing gives you an official license, which you'll show the viewers, because I have one posted on my wall, the state gives you an SSPS number and a family provider number. And when you have your registered license numbers, it goes to DSHS. So families call into DSHS that qualify for child care. Families will call DSHS. The families will give DSHS the provider number, and then they'll approve the state subsidies. The provider goes into the SSPS portal through the Washington Secured Access accounts, and they will claim the students every month for their attendance, and we have to keep attendance records as part of the WAC. And within that, you can get audited.
Do you have to fill out reports like annually or biannually or anything, and then turn them into these departments?
Yeah, so the DOR, you still have to, send your revenues in. Child care, you're not taxed on it, but they still have to know what you're making. You have to file, your annual taxes and whatnot. Every month, in order to get paid through the state, you have to claim the attendance of the students, and you have to keep record. You don't have to give proof of record of the students unless they ask for it. They've actually asked me for my records twice since I've been in operation, which should be easy because you're supposed to keep it anyways. We have parents sign into something called Brightwell. It's a third-party system that keeps record of a lot of stuff. It's a great platform for communicating with parents, and it holds, the attendance. We also have them sign on paper in case for some reason that third-party system would fail. We have paper records as well. So if you get audited, I don't know what would trigger it, honestly, because we've been audited and never had any issues because we just send our attendance records in. But also what's interesting is the way they pay the providers. Sometimes I'll get paid late, or I'll get money that comes in that I didn't claim. And I've actually called them and asked them, well, what is this from? And, some of it is kickbacks or extra funds. And I've never been able to get a real explanation on why, when I do my claims, why do some students I get paid for right, in the here and the now? It's always after service is obtained, but private pay families always pay ahead. The state always pays after you've done care service, where private pay is typically you pay ahead, which.
And just for clarity, so a private person would just be like a family that comes in and cuts you a check out of their personal account, correct?
Yeah.
And then like a state subsidy they have you're getting paid through the state through all these convoluted programs and departments that you're speaking about right now, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
So that's kind of how systematically how that works.
Mm-hmm.
And you then get, you either get paper checks or direct deposit
Right.
for your funds.
Yeah.
So what's interesting for me is like when this all started, I think that there was a lot of struggles getting started, because if you're not a licensed provider, you don't get grant money.
Mm-hmm.
You don't get SBA loans if you're new. Even bank loans typically won't fund you until you're in your third year of business.
Mm-hmm.
So there's not a lot of support, and I started to come about what I now feel are shell companies.
Mm-hmm.
And basically they're companies nonprofits that will take federal money from providers, that's for providers, and say, we're going to appropriate this for you, and we're going to show you where the money goes. And it's very convoluted, because what they're really doing is creating jobs. They're creating jobs off the federal money to have these nonprofit organizations. And I'm noticing that within those nonprofit organizations, there's a lot of like friends and family. And I know this because I actually got involved with one, and I'm not going to name the company.
Yeah.
But I started asking questions pretty early on, especially having two centers at once.
Mm-hmm.
And then also being involved with what I would call maybe a fiscal partner, because, 1 minute they'd be like, okay, we're going to give you a $10,000 for you to, get some toys for your students. And then next thing you know, we order, and like 2 things showed up. And I'm like, oh, where's our stuff? Oh, well, we ran out of money.
Mm-hmm.
And I sat in on some of their, slideshows, and I thought it was very interesting that they, earlier in 2025, they started this new mission that they wanted to bring in a more equitable child care ownership and sponsor Muslim women to own child care centers. And they did a whole PowerPoint on it. And I kind of was like at the point, well, let's follow the money right now. What's going on in our federal department? What kind of grants are going on that maybe would constitute them saying, oh, if we take that money and we create this PowerPoint, then that kind of solves how we're using those funds. And I was able to see, like, pretty quickly that, oh, okay, well, they got that grant and now they've done this PowerPoint, and so that's good enough, or maybe they are going to do that. And it's nothing against, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with, equitable childcare and having different nationalities come in, and I support all of that.
Sure.
But what I am struggling with is having a company take provider money to create jobs, to then hire their own friends for contractors to come and do the work, or create their own LLCs for, oh, we're going to have a design team come in, and or their friend's going to create an LLC to do internet marketing for you. And so there's a lot of like internal LLCs happening, and that they were off-putting the money to these people who would then just come in and do mostly collaborative work. I'm sorry, but I can go on GoDaddy. I can teach one of your people that maybe has language barriers or is struggling to open. I can teach them how to open a business license in an hour.
Yeah.
Right. So why are we giving this person $14,000 for collaboration? And then the reason why I use such a heavy number.
And this is federal money you're talking about here?
Yeah. And I use such a high number because they actually had an architect come in. They said, oh, we're going to help you with your playground. And this actually put me behind a lot, is when you have a nonprofit company coming in and saying they're going to help and support you, you're going to move money differently, especially when not being open for 9 months. I lost so much money during that time. They're like, we're going to give you a playground. Everything's going to be great. This architect came in. They ended up charging the nonprofit organization, because I saw the invoice, $15,000. I got a piece of paper on a design of what my playground's going to look like, and no playground ever came. And they said, oh, sorry, it wasn't for that. It was just for the design. And I said, I can do a design of a daycare. that $14,000, I could have had an entire daycare out there, or a playground out
Mm-hmm.
there. That's not what's needed. So it felt very suspicious. And then I kept kind of digging into that. I can't say that that they weren't helpful, because they definitely were. And that's why I'm not going to name this organization.
Sure.
But I also, but guess what? If that money had come directly to me, I would have had less issues, because I would have been able to appropriate my funds the way I needed to. One thing that bothers me the most right now about the environment that we're in is I would like to give my staff a livable wage.
Mm-hmm.
And we cannot do that, because minimum wage keeps going up and the state subsidy rate stays the same.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't, we can't compete with it.
Now, let me ask you this. Does the state have any say or oversight on your tuition to private families?
As long as it was over the amount that they would pay for state subsidy. You can, before this year, and this just changed this year, private pay could not be less than what the state was willing to pay, or the state would want that rate too. So if I have a military family and they have 2 siblings, if I wanted to give them 10% military discount or 2 sibling discount, something like that, I would have to overcharge them and then bring it down to like what the state would pay. So really they wouldn't be getting any type of discount. I could not go under what the state would pay them.
Okay.
What the state would be paying if they were in
Right.
that program.
Okay.
They have recently changed that, thank goodness, because it's not fair to our working families. And I never agreed with that, which is why I always sponsored a family that, and I looked at all applications, even state paid ones. I've had families who qualify for state subsidy, and I still give them free tuition. So, like, that's money that I'm genuinely taking away from my company to try and support, where I could just enroll them in the state and get the money. But that would be saying something about my character, wouldn't it? And I don't do that. So fast forwarding to kind of where we're at over the year, or over the course of the year, I got open with many barriers and a time frame that was never supposed to be what it ended up being. I got involved with that we'll call fiscal partnership, which I now will just say outright feels like a shell company with a lot of money laundering, which Pierce County is the one who funds them. So if you guys want to dig into that, you're more than welcome to. There's multiple of them, actually. I saw one already named on the internet. So these nonprofits, they're taking the federal money. I'm learning about that. And when I first opened the DCYF, my pre-licenser allowed me to have one director between 2 locations. And this is where that DL versus DCYF transition is important, because the DEL allowed for a shared director. Director would have to be there up to 20 hours in each facility. And what's ended up happening now is the language has been more altered or manipulated to your director needs to be on site at least 50% of operational hours.
Okay.
The DEL did have that as well, but it had extra provisions. But they've removed the provisions of the 20 hours. And now DCYF is only enforcing your director has to be there at 50% of operation hours. I understand the safety of kids. I understand that they want qualified, educated people within the facility overseeing it. But I also understand there's House bills regulating and giving extensions on education, that there's waivers, that there's a shortage of directors that we can't find. And they are not allowed to penalize us for short staffing by certain RCWs. And that's very important, because what ended up happening about 11 months in is between my 2 daycare centers, I had 2 separate licensors, and they would come into each one of my centers and because I would have inspections every 3 months. So after is
that standard to have
when you're new? When you're new, they should be coming in every 3 months.
And that's the county or the city or the state that's doing
DCYF.
Okay.
Yeah,
all right.
Your license are supposed to come in every 3 months.
Okay.
So until you get a full license.
Okay.
So going into what's happening right now with the Somalian population, I can tell you 1,000% that if their license is under a year old, there's no way they didn't know this was happening. Even if it is within 2 years, there's no way they didn't know this was happening.
Right.
That's 1,000%, because they are supposed to come in unless someone wasn't doing their job or it was an inside thing. In any case, my licensors between the two buildings were giving me misinformation or contradictive information. Examples like, oh, your trash cans need to be locked for the diaper changing areas, versus no, your trash cans don't need to be locked. And I'm going to give you one of many, because it just goes on and couldn't make it up, to a point where I had asked DCYF, I said, where's your playbook? Because I have your 75-page walkthrough, and what you guys are saying versus what is happening seems like it's suggestions. It doesn't seem to make sense. It's causing chaos and confusion. And I asked for one licensor because I just could not take it anymore with the multiple different inconsistencies. They refused to do it for quite some time. And I finally pointed out, because I had an employee here who was related to my licensor in the Lakewood location that we're sitting in, that was like a conflict of interest. And I felt like I couldn't reprimand her the appropriate ways without there being some kind of maybe potential retaliation. Because unfortunately, that's something that's very common in the back end of childcare business. And I asked for a new licensor for that reason as well, and they denied me. I ended up doing a public records request where I found them having conversations about it and confirming that the licensor asked, hey, she does not want me here for conflict of interest and the area of potential retaliation. Because unfortunately, that's something that's very common in the back end of childcare business. And I asked for a new licensor for that reason as well, and they denied me. I ended up doing a public records request where I found them having conversations about it and confirming that the licensor asked, hey, she does not want me here for conflict of interest, and the area administrator had denied it. So then I pressed them more on their inconsistencies, and finally they realized that they're inconsistent and that they weren't going to win that, and that it would be best to have one licensor. So I ended up with one licensor, and we had a good relationship. And through the time of being open, you can see in her notes where she says, the daycare center is making progress. They'd do their reports, they'd violate what they felt was wrong. And violations really can be anything from cleanliness, the way staff talk to children behavior, our staff files, our child files, what, like our certificates up to date, is our fall zone on our playgrounds measured at the right capacity for safety. The list goes on and on. It's not uncommon to get violations, but the reason why I'm bringing up violations is because I find it interesting that we have a daycare center that has over 90 violations right now that's come out, and they're still open. And why I find that interesting is because when you're going through the first year,
where is this daycare?
I don't have those facts on me, but it's on the internet. People, they know. Okay. They will probably comment on this video and let you know who it is. We'll let them do some of the footwork there.
Okay.
In any case, it is true. I've seen it, and you can go to the Childcare Aware and you can look up violations. People can look up my violations right now if they wanted to too. But getting into the violation part of it and the expectations of what DCYF wants, it's very interesting how the department started to change their tune with me, because it came in very supportive, and then as I started to ask questions and push back a little bit, it got really reserved, and the communication became to be less than what they should have been doing.